Welcome to Block by Block, where we dive into timely topics at the intersection of crypto, tech, and society. I'm your host, Denelle Dixon, the CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation. My guest today is Marieke Flament, CEO of the NEAR Foundation, a nonprofit that supports the development of the NEAR blockchain protocol and ecosystem. She joined me to discuss what it's really like leading an open source blockchain project and everything that comes with it, navigating through market ups and downs, the considerations behind grant making, perceptions and critiques behind marketing in our line of work, dealing with tribalism in the industry, and thinking sustainably about the foundation's role. Marieke, it's so great to sit down with you for this installment of Block by Block. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Denelle, for having me. It's a privilege to have a conversation with you.
Oh, thank you. We share a lot in common, given that we both lead foundations and support open source blockchains. And we've been trying to get together, I think, since Davos last year or this year in 2022. And so hopefully we'll do that in person soon. But this is sort of the medium way that we can do this, just get together and have a conversation. So there's lots to dig into. So I want to get started. First, can you briefly introduce yourself for everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. Marieke Flament, and I'm the CEO of the NEAR Foundation. And the NEAR Foundation looks after the ecosystem that is built around the NEAR protocol, which is a layer 1 proof of stake protocol.
You have such an interesting career story, starting from being trained as a computer engineer. And what of your early experiences shaped you and motivated you professionally?
Well, so I've been actually raised in different countries with my parents. We moved around a lot. So one of the things that has shaped me most is actually living in foreign countries and therefore having to speak different languages or being, out of place and actually not understanding what people around you are saying. And that's something I carry today a lot because the language we speak actually shape the world we are in or how we see the world. So that's definitely one. And I would say then the other thing that's shaped a lot of how I think I love basketball. I play basketball, so I'm all about team sports and how we work together to win. It's not about individuals, it's actually about the team. And so a team can be, an ecosystem, it can be the team you look after. But those two things I would say are pretty my most fundamental values.
So of all the different countries you lived in, what was the one that had the largest impact on you? China,
by far. I went in China, not really speaking the language. I had taken a couple of taster courses before, and China opened my eyes on so many things. One actually being there is a sense of optimism and anything is possible. And I'll give a concrete example on that. You can get anywhere at any place in China. And bear with me because this was probably like 10, 15 years ago, right? But you could get anywhere and you didn't have, I don't know, a place where to stay or a mean of transport, and there would be a solution. There would be a way to find something to do. And I think that is like, that builds me, because being French, optimism is not necessarily in our culture, I would say. And I say that with the best intention. But that has completely shifted how I think about what's possible.
Well, I think what I loved about what you said is the notion of teamwork, and the definition of team can be so different. I think that is so true, particularly in what we're focused on, both of us, in terms of looking at supporting ecosystems and growing these open source projects. But you've worked in other exciting crypto initiatives prior to NEAR, like launching USDC, the stablecoin with Circle. When did you first get hooked on blockchain?
Yeah, I actually remember that very vividly. So I was working at Expedia and I got a call from a headhunter talking about this Bitcoin startup. And I was like, wrong number. Why are you calling me? For me, it was like, the headlines were more about like, the Silk Road and things like that. So I was like, why are you even calling me? But anyway, the headhunter insisted and said, please read the brief. And I said, okay, fine, I'll read the brief. And it's one of those moments where I remember perfectly the place and time where I was when I read that brief. And then I was like, oh my God, this technology, like I'm a computer science engineer by background. I was like, where have I been? How come I haven't read, and we are, when I talk about that, we are like end 2015. And so I started like reading more about, what is Bitcoin, what is blockchain, what's the technology and so on and so forth. And then I had the opportunity to actually meet Jeremy Allaire, and who, it was not his first gig also. So, successful entrepreneur, has done other things before. And so I was like, wow, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I will say I still, I was like, can I do it? Can I do I have what it takes? It sounds risky. Like, and definitely when I left Expedia, people thought I was full on crazy, which, I will let people have their own judgment. but that was not an easy thing to actually do, again, end 2015, early 2016.
No, I mean, that's true. I think that particularly at that time period and making the jump into this space that early, even when I moved in 2019, people were like, are you crazy? Like, what are you thinking? Like, this is like, that's the wild, wild west. Which, by the way, it was the wild, wild west in the internet days when I first started in that space. So it is kind of funny how we label different areas and how we think about them as risky, and then they turn out to be so interesting and so valuable, not just for us, but also for hopefully lots of folks who can benefit from it. So now at Near, how different is it leading a protocol or leading a project that supports an ecosystem and a layer one protocol versus a company with shareholders?
Yeah, and I think you and I have actually talked a bit about that before, but it's actually so different, right? So to run, so the Near Foundation is a not-for-profit. So that's already one thing you need to wrap your head around. Number two is actually the Near Foundation is a participant in a decentralized ecosystem. So that's another thing you need to wrap your head around. And then number three, it's an open source protocol. So anyone anywhere can actually build, whatever they want on that. And so that's another thing to wrap your head around. And I think, so all that in the context of an industry that actually continuously evolves and moves really, really fast, and an industry that is also shaping itself and having like new ideas every day and every week. All of that are things actually to figure out and to bounce over. So I would say, there is a lot to actually think through. The thing I keep at heart is more, okay, my job is actually to be a servant leader to the Near ecosystem. And so if I put that hat on, then I'm like, what is it that the ecosystem needs? What is it that actually will help the ecosystem get to where it is? Where is it that actually could hurt the ecosystem? And so we think a lot about, governance and engaging with regulators, and what would that look like, and how do we actually keep those best interests at heart. But even that notion of servant leadership is also becomes challenging, for example, when you recruit teams for a foundation, because at the same time you want people who are very good at business and very good at operating and doing all that, but you need people who are selfless and saying like, I'm doing that for the greater good of others, and I'm doing that because I want to enable, as you've said, like hopefully the technologies that we help grow are for enabling people to do good things and improve their lives and so on and so forth. So it is quite a lot, because in centralized top down, when I was at Expedia, you have a P&L, and please grow the P&L. It's actually quite easy to think. I mean, it's difficult. It's a difficult job, but it's easier than actually saying like, what is it to be a not-for-profit, and you have assets, and how do you distribute that? What's right, what's wrong, what's fairness within that, and so on and so forth. So yeah. Definitely.
I think that we have so many similar challenges given our roles, and obviously the Stellar Development Foundation is also a not-for-profit. And I think one of the things that I constantly have to balance the team with is that I want them to understand like our role in the ecosystem, and to understand that we're doing this for the betterment of the ecosystem and helping to fill those gaps by bringing different players into the ecosystem. And yet not all of those players have to have our same mission-oriented model. And that is like a really challenging issue that I think not everyone gets, because you can't find, like, it doesn't matter if the participants in our ecosystem have our same mission, because if we're leveraging the benefits that they bring to the ecosystem to get to our mission, that's really our intent. Do you have that same kind of discussion?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's that's amazing actually what you said, because we're wrestling with that, right? Which is also, it puts the discussion around like, okay, but who's in charge of the overall mission? And maybe it's no one, right? Maybe it's actually the collective everybody has its own mission, and the pieces of the mission actually get to a direction, right? But it's definitely that. And it's also like, how do we reconcile that you are also empowering others, to your point, who might have a different mission, but also maybe, here's another thing we see, and I'm sure you see the same thing, which is like, how do you reconcile some players, and hopefully a lot of players in the ecosystem are also, for profit with their own mindset and thing, which is totally different from actually what a foundation would be doing. And those two things can often clash, right? And you're like, well, no, as you said, you need that piece of the puzzle, because it helps collectively the broader mission. The thing that I find constantly having to also work with the team and reiterate is like, because the puzzles we're all building is very complex. It's actually a puzzle that also in itself even evolves as the industry evolves. figuring that out and having a good understanding and deep enough of what are all the pieces of the puzzle, the one that come every day, every week, and like how things map together, definitely not easy. But yeah, I agree on the mission vision. So do you guys actually do that, for the foundation, and then you have other places that also do their own, and do you like try to even like align that or not even?
Well, it's such a great question. When we first put our mission together, we obviously, when Jed founded the Stellar Development Foundation, they had a mission which was focused on financial inclusion. And I wanted to refine it to get to really one sentence that we could leverage all the time in every write-up that we do and just remind ourselves constantly. And one of the questions that some of the folks internally had was, is this mission for Stellar, or is this mission the Stellar Development Foundation? And very clearly, the mission is that of the Stellar Development Foundation. The Stellar Network is an open source project that anyone can leverage for whatever purpose they so choose. And that is the value of an open system. But so that's how we have really positioned it. And so we have the mission, creating equitable access to the global financial system. And we strive to do everything in support of that in bite-sized chunks, because it's a very big mission. But yeah, it's something that we constantly have to, you have to refine and reflect on in terms of also like, and I wanted to get to this later, but we could jump into it now, like the grant making part. And you guys do a ton of this in terms of grant making as well. Everyone always thinks it's just so easy to give value and to give money away, but it's really hard, particularly when you have to align, because I feel like we're beholden to our mission, and these assets, many of the assets that we hold are Stellar's assets is the way we think about them. And so we have to push them out in a way that supports the growth of the ecosystem, but is consistent with our mandate. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And how is it that, do you have conflict or issues that you have to settle around that as well?
Oh, definitely. Look, I think so. A couple of things on that. So as you said, and I'm really glad actually you say that, because it's also acknowledging that it is really difficult. Giving grants in a way that is actually, fair, transparent, compliant is extremely, extremely difficult, because there is always someone who's going to disagree with that. And the worst that can happen is actually not making a decision or not having like this vision of what is actually right. So I think it's extremely difficult. We've also pivoted quite a lot from what we do and how we do it in that front. So we've been testing, and again, the market has changed, right? So in a bull market, it's almost like, okay, there's not enough talent, and how do you get the talent to want to build on you? So you're in a market where you need to actually go fast. And so how do you go fast? So we tested a program which was like Fast Grant. How can you actually entice people to start working with you and then get a flavor of what it is? That has its own, fallback. And then we went into more, okay, can we be more strategic? And what are, the pillars and therefore the verticals that make sense for this broader mission? And actually, how can we help creators build without limits? Okay, so what are the things that we do on that front? And now that we're in a bear market, again, totally different. So what we're seeing and what we're actually doing is saying, okay, grants might not actually be also the best way to deploy capital. And what people need is actually also help, and help can be content, and help can actually be connections. And you start getting into the feed of what much more looks like an accelerator, right? And which also fits perfectly in the mandate of a foundation, which is like helping connect people actually so that they can achieve actually their mission. But yeah, it's pretty one of the parts where I find we never really find completely our mojo. And no matter what you do, it feels really difficult. So yeah.
Well, and sometimes I have to remind myself that this is why I think that this is the best job I've ever had, because you never can get comfortable in what it is that you're doing. You're constantly having to challenge yourself to figure out how best to achieve the goals that you've set out for the foundation in support of the ecosystem. And so it is complicated and ever changing, but I think that actually is it provides me with that intellectual stimulation constantly. So again, the best job I've ever had. And I hope that you feel the same.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I definitely feel the same. It's like no 2 weeks are the same. Actually, I don't know how much you plan in advance, but even like planning in advance in a normal corporate, you'd say like, quarter and 6 months and a year. And here I'm like, yeah, we can try for a quarter, but we've had, major systemic crisis in the world and in crypto, like every 2 months. So it's almost like whatever you do, you need to constantly mitigate. But it makes the job, you're right, absolutely intellectually fascinating, and actually also very rewarding, because it's a space in which you see the impact of the actions you do very, very fast.
Yeah, I love that. And planning is, I think, one of those things that we get better at as we go through. And then, of course, we find ourselves flat on our face sometimes as a result of it. So, which brings me to the fact that we're recording this episode in early December of 2022, and we're all still watching the details unfold around the FTX news that broke last month in November. So what's been your reaction to the news?
Yeah, so couple of things. One of disbelief. I think for me, there was a moment where I think there was a tweet that was shared on customer funds were used, and I was like, oh my God, like that, that was a very big moment. Of course, there were also like, it becomes a crisis situation because everybody wants to know, like, how exposed are you, right? Like, what's the exposure and what does it mean? So we had to think a lot and actually articulate that our position is very strong because as a NEAR foundation, a lot of our capital actually is in fiat, held in banks. And so, we've been extremely conservative on that, which again, in a bull market can be criticized a lot. But now I'm extremely grateful that that's the path we chose. And so we've reassured on that front. And then he was also like, okay, but FTX, what's the exposure? And actually what do you have? So thanks God we had, no funds on FTX. And while FTX and Alameda have NEAR tokens, it's a very limited amount in the grand scheme of things, and a super small amount of that is actually liquid. Nevertheless, it's a message you need to, hammer and have understood and get through the teams and the community and so on and so forth. And then I think the rest is more for me now. And I'd love to hear your perspective on it, because for me it's also reflecting on the impact this is going to have on the entire industry, right? I felt we had made a lot of progress in actually building trust, and the technology has made so much progress also in what we can do, and we can build real use cases. And in particular on NEAR, we see so many amazing, great use cases that go from, open forest protocol, which is a protocol to actually help reforestation and track that, to actually the work we do with Cell GP and so on and so forth. So many great things. And then you feel, okay, this is going to set all of us back because we're going to be all put in the same bag, right? Of like, this is therefore the entire reputation of the space. So that saddens me. And I also want to, help on that. And how do we come together? Again, never a fan of like, just big voices. I think it needs to be collective voice that also comes together. And I think we'll have a lot of work to do on that. And my other concern is obviously on regulation, right? What's going to be regulators' instinct and reaction to that? And again, I think the only way to work through that is collectively. And there's two things. There's the tech, and then there is the crypto assets that are being traded. And how do we get to actually that more profound understanding? So yes, it's been a weird wheel. It feels like, we've had a rehearsal with like Terra Luna, which was already like first shot into the entire. Yeah. So it's almost becoming a playbook. But what's been on your side? What's been your reaction, and how do you guys manage it?
Well, I think that from our standpoint, we're very similar as a foundation. We have a lot of fiat, and the fiat is in bank accounts. And it's so funny. I always talk about talk to the team. It's really easy to get FOMO and to look at all of the things that everyone else is doing out there and to say, why aren't we doing more of that? And we're pretty conservative in terms of how we approach certainly our financial position, but also in terms of how we approach grants and how we approach a lot of different things about what we do. And then in times like these, I get texts and Slacks from my teammates who say, I'm so grateful that we're so conservative. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I think, for me, there's a part of me that's really infuriated about this. And the more I can't stop myself from watching the interviews and the discussions around this. And it's actually probably not super healthy for me because it just makes me angrier and angrier, only because I feel like this is so not about blockchain and crypto.
It is not.
And the more that we can talk about that as a collective and just continue to highlight that, and to talk about this as hubris and arrogance and really flaunting things that really were significantly important to any time that you're trusted with anything for customers, which in this case was real value. And to then come out and say, I'm sorry, great, I appreciate the sorry, but that's actually not sufficient because there has to be a learning here for the whole industry. And so I think that mostly I feel like we're going to get back on track. I always talk about policy from the standpoint of taking 10 steps forward and 2 steps back. Always here, we took a bit more. We took, maybe 50 steps back, 100 steps back. But I think that that's actually for the good of the industry. Ultimately, we'll learn lessons and we'll come out stronger and having been involved in the early days of the internet, I've seen this movie before, and I know what comes out the other side is stronger than what went in. So I'm very hopeful, and I definitely see a positive future, but it has been very frustrating for lots of reasons, but mostly just that whole thing about, like, there's so many of us out here like you guys that are doing good and focus on use cases, and we need that attention, but that's not attention grabbing a lot of times.
That's the
I don't know.
problem.
Yeah,
But that's
I don't know how
exactly
you
the
feel
problem.
about that. Yeah.
Well, but I think it's actually a very good lesson, because I cannot tell you the number of times that I've been told that I'm not, vocal enough on Twitter, or not tweeting enough, or things like that. And I'm like, well, but so hang on, is that what we're about? Like, is it about, hype? And part of my training actually has been in training, not, but like part of my career has been in marketing. And to me, you need solid fundamentals. You need to think of, like, what are you doing for users, and what's the use case, and where's the value, and what's the go-to-market, right? Not like the headline and the tweet and the thing, right? And so this whole hype thing, and because that's what it turned into, it was like a hype machine. Then I'm not comfortable about. And also the other thing is, like, the voices that seem to be heard most are the loudest voices, which and that's also pretty, and I know it's a topic you're so passionate about, which, not all diverse and inclusive voices are loud and might not want to be loud and aren't comfortable being loud. And I think we also need to respect that. So hopefully one of the biggest learning is also on that front, that it's not because you shout the loudest or brag the most that you're actually building things that add value. And if we can also shift some of the industry on not looking at, TVL of price of things as a value, and or number of, or actually number of retweets, maybe we can get to some real use cases and fundamental value, and therefore like an impact of the things that we're all trying to do. So yeah, but it's been definitely, it's a mix of emotions, right? It's like you go from being infuriated to actually sad to self-reflection of, like, what is this? Like, for me, the world has already so many problems. For, like, there's a climate crisis, there is, like, wars that are on the European territory, there's, like, a global recession, and we have in our hands great technology. Like, how can we use that to do something useful and purposeful and some good, right? And then when you see stuff like that, it is infuriating, to say the least.
And I think it is, like, it's really important that we focus on the maturity of the ecosystem at large, the larger blockchain crypto space. And this is one of those areas where you can't actually, when you're holding customer assets and you're thinking about what you need to do as an entity, you can't ignore internal controls. You can't ignore those things that are just, like, tried and true and real. And that's not about regulation. That's not about decentralization. That's just about, like, common sense and good business thinking. And that's the part that I want people to focus on out of this, is that I don't care if you're 19 or 55, like, you need to be very respectful when it comes to the things that matter, which is when people put trust in you. And that's something that I think we've all learned at different ages and at different times in our life, but that is the constant. So for me, that's the thing that I pull out of this. And I do believe that it doesn't have to be the loudest voices. It has to be the most persistent. And that's what I've told my team time and time again. We're going to be persistent. We're going to be constant. We're going to be repetitive. And someday, like, there'll be the right amount of attention on that. But it's easy to focus on those shiny objects. I mean, we all like them.
So. I love what you said. The word I use is convictions, because it's also like you need to have convictions, and it's hard to have convictions and to say, for example, our conviction is like, it's about users. It's always been about users, right? And so having this persistency conviction, sometimes being boring, that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, and there's this constant struggle. I wonder if you feel it too, where your ecosystem sometimes doesn't feel that you're doing enough in terms of marketing, or enough in terms of, how do you respond to that, or do you?
Oh my God, the amazing question. I will have my team watch this. But so thank you, we're not alone. Look, one thing actually on that front, I think there's a misconception into what marketing is, because and I, in our ecosystem, a lot of amazing builders, and they build great tech, and very few of them actually have also the depths of experience yet to think about 360 and what is it that is good go to market, and actually the great tech you're building, what problem does it solve for who? And that's where marketing starts. But, is it the role of a foundation to do all that work for you? No, it's not. Like you're a full-fledged project, and therefore this is your role. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning, which is, what's the mission of the foundation within that? It's to help raise the entire ecosystem, not just like certain specific things. And so within that mandate, yes, there is going to be voices that actually help raise the entire ecosystem. There's going to be others that don't. One way we actually also help on that is we've been decentralizing more and more sort of like marketing, because nothing prevents actually, a marketing DAO to be in the community and the ecosystem, and actually to self-judge also for themselves what they think should have marketing and what happens. We've also seen more and more like marketing agencies that are starting to span out in the ecosystem. All of that is fantastic because actually it can help, and you have different voices that are doing different things. But yeah, it's that's I'm glad to hear you have the same challenge. I'd love to hear how you how you answer it.
I think from one of the things is that what we do, and I always say slow and steady wins the race. I'm a runner, and I really think about the fact that I train every day to be able to push myself even further in the next race that I do. And I think about the fact all the time that it's not necessarily the one who gets to the finish line the fastest that's achieved the goals that they want to achieve. And so for us, sure, our finish line is that, the equitable access to the global financial system. That's going to take us a long time. And so we have to be methodical and thoughtful in each of our approach. So we obviously focus on marketing a lot for the ecosystem players, and we help them. But you're right, a lot of it is incumbent on them to be able to take that on and become those institutions that are managing this for themselves. And then we also really do spend a lot of time really pushing out the ideas of what Stellar can do. But it is never enough. And I understand, and I take the feedback every time, and I reflect on what it is that we could change and do differently. But the truth of the matter is it's never going to be enough. And that's actually good, because that means that people care about what it is that we're doing, and they're pushing us to even do more. And so that's what I bring back to the team, is that this is all really positive attention, even if it feels negative when it comes out at us. It's because they want more from the ecosystem. They want more from Stellar. So I definitely feel like it's not a battle that you can win, but that's okay, because we're going to continue to be in that fight for a really long time, because we want this ecosystem. And I'm a really huge believer in interoperability. I'm a really big believer that there's not a winner take all in this market. I feel like that's the exact market that we have right now in the existing financial infrastructure is siloed, and we don't want that. And so we want to be able to support ecosystems at large, like all different, like the Near Foundation. What you guys are doing is so important in terms of your focus on Web3 and in terms of the development of all of the different projects that you have there. And none of this we don't need to put down one other for all of us to be successful. And so I think that this is like the message that I constantly try to bring out, which I know is a bit of idealism, but I think it's a really, really important thing. Having gone from the early days of the web, when we had this like, oh, we're going to do standards and we're going to have everybody work together, and it worked for the infrastructure layer, but it didn't work on top. And we need to make it work on top here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's this idea also of, ultimately certain things are good for certain use cases, and certain things might be good for certain geographies and not. And so I think it's also this interoperability is really important. It's interesting you say that, because it's also something we really believe in. And sometimes it's difficult because you need to reconcile being open and friendly and working with others. And it's still actually a place where you need to also compete, right? And you also still need to actually grow and think about how you do that for your ecosystem. But hopefully that's another thing that we can get out from all of that is, collectively also, what are we actually trying to do? And how does it land into a place that is interoperable and actually open and collaborative?
Yeah, I think it is the ultimate goal for us to be able to achieve that. And I think that the more that we can have conversations like this, but just across ecosystems, and to make it so that it's clear that, again, the winner take all market is what we have right now in the traditional financial infrastructure, where we have very few rails that actually are operable, and we have geographies that don't talk to one another. So that's not what we want to get to, which I think gets me to this point that I feel like there's a lot of tribalism in crypto. And it can get pretty intense. And I think some people might even be surprised to hear that we're having this conversation, because what Near is doing and what Stellar is doing, they're not that dissimilar. But I really believe that we have to build toward a more like this interoperable future. where different chains bring different strengths. So what about your work are you most energized by? And like, how do you think about this notion of interoperability and bringing these different ecosystems together?
Yeah, well, I think about also, more the global thing we're trying to do, right? And so I think also about us as a collective industry who's also trying to figure out, what does it look like? And if you go back to the basis of what we all believe in is that, okay, new technology enables things to be done differently and therefore enable better outcome, right? Like if I shortcut, that's very often like what rallies all of us behind that. But then you're right, it feels that there is a lot of tribalism and almost like, it's communities against communities, and we do see that on Twitter of all platforms. Yeah. we need an alternative to a centralized platform. But I think the point you make and actually having conversations like that, I think is really important because ultimately, so a couple of things. One, we share the same challenges, and two, actually, we're all trying to get to things that are in a way very similar and that create greater good. And three, I don't think any of us can actually get there on its own and do that. And I think there's lessons to be learned and things to actually be improved everywhere. And maybe more importantly, also, if we are too tribal and keep like fragmenting things, then it's impossible for any of us to be taken seriously by actually, the people who are now probably saying, told you so, should end it. But I think that's also never more than now is there a moment where it's actually really important to show a unified front and to go back to the basics of what is it that Web3 and blockchain and open source protocols are trying to achieve, and why does it matter, and what are the real use cases that are being built on that, and that there is also people that are responsible and that have had several careers before that, and that do not think that in a neither arrogant nor like care or in a careless way, but that we care actually, and we have good working business principles. So I think it's really important actually in times like that to come together. Yeah,
I agree. And in terms of what would you like to see happen in 2023? I know it feels very far off, and I totally get what you said earlier, which is that we never really know what's going to happen in the next month, let alone the next quarter. But what do you want to see happen in 2023 for NEAR, but also maybe for legislation?
Yeah, so for NEAR, I would say it's interesting. It feels that there is never has it been more important to actually have the values of Web3. And so when I look, for example, at what's happening today on Twitter, it's because we've always been talking about like owning your own content, owning your own governance, and yes, it's an idea and we can put our heads around it, but it's never felt so true than now. And so I'm like, and the technology is here to actually enable that. So I'm like, this is it. This is the moment where actually there is a path and a way to show what the internet was supposed to be, and therefore how do we do that? And so my hope for 2023 is really to see that emerge, and seeing that emerge means also we don't have to explain anymore what is blockchain, and we don't have to say like a layer one or protocol, like whatever, like, because at the end of the day, all that is jargon. And I go back to first marketing principle, which is, well, who's the user and what problem does it solve? And so actually, if you think today of a platform like Twitter or Instagram and going there and actually giving all up your content, your data, and you're saying, well, the problem would be that shuts down, then everything you've built is gone. That feels like a big problem to solve, right? So for 2023, it's really about that real use cases that therefore make the industry not having to justify or hide behind jargon terms. And in terms of regulation, I think it will definitely be a very interesting and important year, I would say. And I think on that front, my hope is for not over regulation and overreaction on the back of what's happening. I think there's been already some very good and strong pillars. You can look in Europe with Mika, and you can look already at the work that had started. I think we should continue on fundamentals in that direction. And I hope we don't get to a place which makes, no one able to actually do anything. I think it's also really important to start thinking of technology versus like, crypto trading or assets. Those are different things. And I think if there is, something that's probably urgent to regulate, as we've been shown over and over, it's centralized centralized finance, centralized exchanges. So I think that's where I hope there'll be attention so that we can get back to some good basics.
Yeah, I think that's right. I loved actually what Parliament seemed to get this week, which was the first government to sort of come out and say that what happened with FTX wasn't about blockchain and crypto. And that message is a really clear message that needed to come out. You know, as you were talking, I was reflecting on when I was doing research for this episode. I saw a blog post that was up before your time, actually, but it talked about the fact that the goal of the NEAR Foundation is that it's wound down its core entity, and the sustainability is handed off to each of the core functions to teams within the ecosystem. Is that still like the way that you guys are thinking about this, like sort of making yourself a part of this ecosystem, but more and more pushing it out in like this decentralized form?
Yes, it is definitely still the thinking. Now, here's the interesting thing that I've learned and seen over the last year, and even more now that we are in a very bear market, is it felt we were on a good way to get there. And now it feels like things, because they're shrinking and some projects will go under. And there is almost like a rethinking of, okay, what is it that collectively the ecosystem needs to do? So it's still definitely like the vision where we want to get. Ultimately, a foundation still has a role in an ecosystem, but does it need to be a large, player in that ecosystem? Ideally, it doesn't. And we've started some really great work with, actually, we have a governance working group, and they're working on, constitution, and they have 3 DAOs that they actually help, which is marketing, creative, and developer DAO. And they think through that, and that's a way for me to be pragmatic about getting there, but like to start testing the water on that front. What about you? Is it something that you also think, and do you think the same way?
Yeah, I think that what eventually the foundation, there's always a place for the Stellar Development Foundation. Right now, we spend a lot of time focusing on making integration with the network simple, like helping to develop software to be able to do that. We focus on making these grants so that we can fill gaps. I remember when I first started, what I thought about was like a minimum viable ecosystem, and really getting to make sure that we had that. We're well past the minimum viable ecosystem. And so now I reflect on where are those gaps and how can we push other players to fill those gaps so that we don't have to. So I think that sort of is always going to be our role. I also really love policy. And I think the foundation is a really great place for it for policy to continue to sit. And this notion of like the how we can work on behalf of and sometimes through the participants in the ecosystem to really make this space more understandable for lots of players out there. So, but definitely, I think that, what I would love, and what I said when I think I did a blog post in 2019, where I said that we wanted to have all of the assets that we call Stellar's assets. So these, the lumens that we hold on behalf of the ecosystem in our mandate, and we have it visible on our mandate section of the website. I wanted to have those granted out within 10 years. I think that's hard, but I still am focused on making that happen. It is harder in a bear market for sure. And then it becomes harder for different reasons in a bull market. But yes, I think we have much the same view as to what our roles. And I think also, even over time, our role has really shifted in terms of how we think about what the foundation can do to support the ecosystem and the network. So I think it's just being really flexible and thinking about that as we pursue it.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because if you think of it, like our ecosystems grow and shift and change. And so our shape changes, like all that is, and that's why I think, and I'm sure it's pretty similar for you, but like even having our teams be super adaptable, right? Because the reality is like we're on moving grounds, having organisms that need to evolve also with what's moving underneath us. So yeah.
So Marieke, that was such a fun time for us to spend together. I want us to do this more, because this is it's so great to talk to someone who totally gets the same things that we're dealing with here, and even from the different perspective of what NEAR is focused on and the project itself. So where can people follow you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So near.org is actually the place where you can find everything and anything about NEAR, and I think that's a very good entry point. And if you really must, I'm on Twitter. But that's the place where you can also find that, or also follow at NEAR Protocol on Twitter. We actually have quite good stuff going on there.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Block by Block. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released, and follow me on Twitter to stay in the loop in between episodes. I'll talk to you next time.